They tried to humiliate you in that meeting yesterday. Your face flushed, your chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at you to defend yourself, to prove them wrong. And so you did. You explained, you justified, you argued. You thought you were showing strength. But hours later, lying awake at night, you realized something disturbing. They controlled the entire interaction. They chose the battlefield. They decided the rules. And you played exactly the role they assigned you. That uncomfortable feeling gnawing at you right now, it's recognition. The realization that your desperate need to respond, to be right, to be understood, was actually your greatest weakness. Friedrich Nietzsche observed this psychological trap over a century ago. He saw how the most intelligent, educated people could be completely manipulated through one simple vulnerability: their inability to remain silent. All truly great thoughts are conceived while walking, he wrote, not while frantically defending yourself, not while desperately trying to convince others of your worth. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the loudest or the most articulate. It's the one watching silently, calculating, observing your emotional triggers, noticing what makes you react. While you expose your psychological weaknesses with every defensive word, they reveal nothing. They understand what most never grasp. Words are not power, they're leaks in your armor. Throughout history, the most formidable figures weren't necessarily the most talkative. They were the ones who understood the strategic value of silence, who recognized that every word you speak potentially reveals weakness, exposes vulnerability, and gives others ammunition against you. The truly powerful don't feel compelled to explain themselves. They don't chase validation. They don't desperately try to convince others of their worth. Consider this unsettling reality. In most arguments, neither side is actually seeking truth. They're pursuing something far more primal, the psychological need to be right, to be validated, to maintain their fragile self-image. People don't argue to learn, they argue to win. And in this desperate pursuit of victory, they reveal everything about their insecurities, their triggers, and their psychological weak points. What Nietzsche understood with brutal clarity was that most human interaction isn't about exchange of ideas. It's about power dynamics. And the person who reacts emotionally, who can't resist responding to provocation, who feels compelled to correct every misperception, has already surrendered control of the situation. They've become predictable, manipulable, and weak. The will to power, Nietzsche's core insight into human psychology, isn't about dominating through aggression. It's about mastery, first over yourself, then over your environment. The person who must always respond, who can't resist having the last word, who reacts to every provocation. This person isn't powerful. They're a puppet whose strings are easily pulled by anyone who understands their psychological triggers. What Nietzsche recognized is that true power lies in strategic restraint, in watching while others reveal their insecurities through desperate explanations, in allowing your opponent to exhaust themselves while you preserve your energy, in choosing when to engage rather than being manipulated into engagement. This isn't passive weakness. It's the calculated patience of a predator who strikes only when victory is assured. Throughout history, the most formidable strategic minds have employed silence as a psychological weapon. Socrates didn't simply tell people they were wrong. He asked questions that led them to dismantle their own arguments. Steve Jobs didn't waste energy arguing over every small detail. He created an aura of authority through selective communication. Ancient samurai like Musashi understood that psychological dominance often preceded physical victory, disorienting opponents through unpredictability and strategic absence. These weren't just random tactics. They were manifestations of a profound psychological truth. Humans can't stand uncertainty. When you remain silent in situations where others expect reaction, you create an information vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the human mind rushes to fill it, often with its own fears, insecurities, and worst-case interpretations. Modern psychology confirms what Nietzsche intuited. Silence triggers powerful psychological responses. When you don't react as expected, when you don't take the bait, don't rise to provocations, don't engage with attacks, you create cognitive dissonance in the other person. Their mind scrambles to make sense of your unexpected response, often projecting their own insecurities onto your silence. Why do people find silence so uncomfortable in confrontations? Because silence forces them to confront themselves. Without your reactions to focus on, without the comforting validation of your emotional response, they're left standing naked before their own motivations. Silence strips away the distractions that allow people to avoid self-examination. This psychological dynamic reveals something far more profound than tactics for winning arguments. It exposes the fundamental power structures Nietzsche identified in human psychology. He described two distinct moral frameworks that determine your relationship to power: slave morality and master morality. Slave morality operates from reaction and external validation. Those trapped in this mindset are defined by their relationship to others. They seek approval, fear rejection, and modify their behavior based on others' expectations. Their words and actions are reactions, not choices. Their identity exists only in relation to what others think of them. Master morality, by contrast, operates from internal values and self-validation. Those who embody this mindset don't need others to approve or understand their choices. They don't feel compelled to explain or justify. They act from conviction rather than reaction. Their power comes not from controlling others, but from being impossible to control. They simply refuse to play psychological games on anyone else's terms. This is why silence can be so devastating as a psychological tactic. When you refuse to engage on expected terms, when you don't rise to provocations, don't defend against accusations, don't justify your positions, you're essentially saying, your opinion of me is so irrelevant that it doesn't even warrant a response. This is the ultimate power move, because it completely inverts the assumed dynamic. The person who thought they were attacking you suddenly realizes they're swinging at shadows while you remain untouched. Consider how this plays out in everyday situations. Someone insults you, expecting anger or defensiveness. Instead, you meet them with calm, silent observation. They push harder, desperate for the reaction they're not getting. With each escalation that fails to provoke you, their psychological position weakens. They appear increasingly unhinged while you remain composed. Without saying a word, you've completely altered the power dynamic. But mastering strategic silence requires overcoming powerful psychological barriers. We're conditioned to believe that not responding means admitting fault, that silence equals agreement, that failing to defend ourselves is weakness. These beliefs run deep, reinforced by a culture that celebrates verbal dominance and quick comebacks. The ego desperately wants to correct misperceptions, to ensure everyone knows the truth, to prove itself right. Overcoming this programming requires confronting uncomfortable questions. Why do I feel compelled to respond? What am I afraid will happen if I don't? What insecurity is being triggered right now? Often, the frantic need to respond stems not from conviction, but from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, judged, or dismissed. Nietzsche would argue that true liberation comes from breaking free of this psychological prison, from no longer being enslaved by the opinions of others. The Übermensch, or Superman, his ideal of human excellence, isn't defined by winning debates or dominating conversations. He's defined by self-mastery, by the ability to remain unmoved by external judgments, unswayed by the desperate need for approval. This isn't about becoming emotionless or never speaking up. It's about choice, about responding strategically rather than reactively. The true master speaks when there's something worth saying, not because they feel compelled to fill silence or defend their ego. Their communication is purposeful, not desperate. And this selective engagement makes their words carry exponentially more weight when they do choose to speak. But What about practical application? How do we transform Nietzsche's philosophical insights into tactical advantage in real-world situations? Let's examine 3 specific contexts where strategic silence can completely alter power dynamics. First, in confrontations. When someone attacks you verbally, they're setting a trap, baiting you into an emotional response that will put you at a disadvantage. They want you off balance, reactive, and defensive. By refusing to take the bait, by meeting aggression with calm silence, you deny them the reaction they're seeking. This creates immediate psychological discomfort. The aggressor, expecting an emotional exchange, suddenly finds themselves in a monologue, their attacks echoing awkwardly in the silence. As discomfort builds, they typically follow a predictable pattern. They escalate, hoping for the reaction they haven't yet provoked. This escalation often makes them appear increasingly unhinged while you remain composed. Bystanders notice the contrast. The power dynamic shifts visibly. Without saying a word, you've established psychological dominance. Second, in negotiations. The person who speaks first and most frequently in negotiations usually gives away the most leverage. Silence creates pressure, a vacuum the other party feels compelled to fill, often with concessions. When you make an offer and then remain silent, the other person typically feels uncomfortable with the tension and starts negotiating against themselves, offering more favorable terms just to break the silence. Master negotiators understand that patience is a weapon. They don't rush to fill awkward silences. They allow tension to build, knowing that most people will eventually break and reveal their position, simply to escape the discomfort. By controlling your impulse to speak, you force the other party to show their hand first, giving you information advantage. Third, in leadership. The most respected leaders aren't necessarily the most talkative. They're the ones who speak with purpose and precision. Leaders who constantly explain, justify, and elaborate actually diminish their authority. They appear insecure, as though seeking approval rather than providing direction. Contrast this with leaders who communicate selectively, who choose their moments carefully and make their words count. Their silence creates an aura of authority. When they do speak, people listen because they've established that they don't waste words. This selective engagement gives their communication disproportionate impact. Silence becomes part of their power, not a void to be filled. But isn't this manipulation? You might ask, isn't there something dishonest about such calculated restraint? This objection reveals how deeply we've internalized the belief that constant verbal engagement equals authenticity. Strategic silence isn't passive-aggressive withdrawal or avoidance. It's conscious choice rooted in self-knowledge. Nietzsche wasn't advocating manipulation through silence, but rather freedom from psychological compulsion. The freedom achieved when you're no longer driven by others' perceptions. The Übermensch doesn't strategically withhold response to harm others, but because they operate from such secure internal values that external validation becomes irrelevant. They choose silence not to manipulate, but because they refuse to be manipulated by their own reactive impulses. This approach doesn't mean never expressing yourself or fighting for what matters. It means engaging from sovereign choice rather than psychological compulsion. The master communicator isn't silent out of fear or emptiness, but from the profound understanding that power lies in controlling when and why you speak. Many misinterpret strategic silence as weakness because they themselves use silence as avoidance or surrender. But authentic power comes from knowing you could respond effectively and choosing not to, because the interaction itself is beneath your larger purpose. As Nietzsche wrote, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe, and strategic silence is often your most effective weapon in that struggle. Consider how this applies to social media, perhaps the ultimate test of our ability to practice strategic silence. Platforms designed to provoke emotional reaction, to reward immediate response, to trigger our most primal need for validation. How many careers have been destroyed reputations ruined, and lives derailed by the inability to resist responding to provocation online. The truly powerful in this environment aren't those who engage with every criticism, who feel compelled to correct every misperception, who can't resist responding to attacks. They're the ones who understand that engagement itself is often the trap, that responding to provocation, even to debunk it, still means playing a game designed by someone else. But mastering strategic silence requires overcoming powerful psychological barriers. Let's examine the 3 most common obstacles that prevent people from harnessing this form of power. First, the fear of being misunderstood. We have a primal desire to be seen accurately, to have others understand our true intentions and character. When someone misrepresents us, everything in our being screams to correct the record. But Nietzsche would argue that this desperate need to be understood by everyone is itself a form of weakness, a sign that we're still seeking external validation rather than operating from internal values. The truly powerful understand that being universally understood is impossible. They accept that some people will misinterpret their silence, their actions, their motivations, and they make peace with that reality. They focus their energy on those who matter, not on correcting every misperception. Second, the addiction to being right. Most people are so attached to being perceived as correct that they'll sacrifice strategic advantage just to prove a point. They'll engage in arguments they can't win with people who won't be convinced, simply to satisfy their ego's demand that they not let it go. Nietzsche recognized this as a profound weakness, this inability to allow others to be wrong about you. The master knows when proving themselves right serves their purposes, and when it's merely ego gratification. They can allow others to believe incorrect things when correcting those beliefs doesn't advance their true objectives. Third, the fear of seeming weak. In a culture that celebrates verbal dominance, many fear that silence will be interpreted as inability to respond, as weakness rather than restraint. They worry that not defending themselves equals admitting fault, that not responding to criticism implies acceptance of its validity. This fear reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of true power. The need to constantly demonstrate strength through verbal assertion often masks deep insecurity. The truly strong don't need to continuously prove their strength. They're secure enough to be strategically vulnerable when it serves their purpose. So, how do we develop this capacity for powerful silence? How do we overcome these psychological barriers and transform our relationship to communication? Nietzsche would suggest starting with radical self-examination. First, identify your triggers, the specific situations, accusations, or challenges that provoke immediate emotional response. What makes you feel you must respond right away? What can't you let pass? These triggers reveal your psychological vulnerabilities, the places where your ego is most fragile, most dependent on external validation. Next, practice restraint in low-stakes situations. When you feel the impulse to respond immediately to a message, wait 5 minutes, then 10, then an hour. Notice the physical and emotional sensations that arise when you don't immediately react. The discomfort you feel is the voice of your ego, demanding the validation of response. Each time you withstand this discomfort, you strengthen your ability to choose response over reaction. Next, study those who have mastered selective engagement. They're easy to identify. They're the ones whose rare contributions silence the room. When they finally speak, everyone listens. These people understand what most never grasp. Social capital increases with scarcity. Those who respond to everything, who can't resist jumping into every conversation, who need to voice an opinion on every topic, they devalue their own words through oversupply. Now you're ready to practice strategic silence when it matters most. When someone provokes you in public, experiment with remaining calm and minimally responsive. Don't match their emotional intensity. Don't take the bait. Watch what happens in this vacuum of expected reaction. Notice how they often escalate, becoming increasingly desperate for the emotional engagement you're denying them. With each escalation, they reveal more about their insecurities while you reveal nothing. This practice yields an unexpected discovery. Silence doesn't diminish your influence, it magnifies it. Your words, when finally spoken, land with the impact of scarcity. Your selective engagement creates an aura of authority that no amount of verbose explanation can match. Your composed non-reaction to provocation demonstrates a self-mastery others find simultaneously unnerving and compelling. This paradox sits at the heart of Nietzsche's insight. The most profound power often lies not in what you do, but in what you deliberately choose not to do. Not in speaking, but in the strategic decision to remain silent. Not in reaction, but in composed observation. Not in trying to control others, but in becoming impossible to control yourself. As he wrote, "He who would learn to fly one day must first learn to stand and walk and run and climb and dance. One cannot fly into flying." The most psychologically dominant individuals in history mastered strategic silence. They understood when words serve their purpose and when silence gives them advantage. They recognized that emotional reaction is often the trap, that engagement itself can be surrender, that responding to provocation means you've already lost frame control. They knew that power lies not in winning every battle, but in choosing which battles deserve their energy. The Übermensch, Nietzsche's vision of human psychological potential, isn't the person who dominates through force or clever rhetoric. It's the individual who transcends the need for constant external validation, who develops such internal strength that others' opinions become irrelevant to their choices. The true master isn't the one with the quickest comeback. It's the one with the psychological fortitude to remain silent when everyone else is compelled to speak. The next time someone tries to provoke you, whether in a meeting, an argument, or online, remember this. The person who reacts first has surrendered power. The one who feels compelled to defend, explain, or justify has accepted the other's frame. The one who cannot tolerate the discomfort of strategic silence has already lost the psychological battle. True power begins with mastering your own reflexive need to speak, with your ability to observe without revealing your thoughts, to maintain composure while others become emotional, to choose your responses rather than having them triggered by others. This capacity for strategic restraint represents a level of psychological development most never reach, a power available only to those with the discipline to sit in the discomfort of silence. The question isn't whether you can win the verbal exchange, it's whether you have the strength to transcend it entirely, not from fear, not from weakness, but from the profound understanding that the most powerful response often requires no words at all, that silence itself can communicate a level of psychological dominance that no clever retort can match. Those who understand Nietzsche's silent power move through the world differently. They remain unruffled when others are triggered. They maintain composure when everyone else loses control. They speak only when it serves their purpose, not when others pull their strings. Will you continue being manipulated by your own compulsive need to respond? Or will you claim the power that comes through mastery of strategic silence? Subscribe for more psychological insights they don't teach you in school. Comment below with the most valuable insight you're taking from this video. Challenge yourself. Rise above. Become more.